Princess had never wanted a human bodyguard. She stood at the tall window of her private chambers and watched the transport ship descend through the pale violet clouds of her. The ship was small and gray and ugly, built for war rather than beauty. It was exactly what she expected from humans. The people had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They were tall and graceful, with skin that glowed like living moonlight. But their skin was also their greatest vulnerability. It changed color with their emotions, broadcasting every feeling to anyone who cared to watch. A who could not control their skin could never be trusted with power. They would be seen as weak, unstable, dangerous. Had spent her entire life learning to keep her skin perfectly still. She was the daughter of Emperor, heir to the throne of 100 worlds. She could not afford to feel anything. Her father had called her to his throne room that morning and told her about the alliance. Earth had joined the Galactic Council, and the Emperor wanted to show good faith by accepting a human soldier into the Royal Guard. Not just any position in the Guard. The human would serve as personal protector. Had wanted to scream. She had wanted to argue. She had wanted to tell her father that she did not need protection from anyone, especially not from a. Humans came from a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. Their world had earthquakes and hurricanes and predators with too many teeth. They had evolved to be aggressive and loud and terrifyingly emotional. But had said nothing. She had kept her skin perfectly white, perfectly calm, and she had accepted her father's decision with a small bow of her head. Now she watched the transport land in the palace courtyard, and tried not to let her skin flicker with the pale blue light of dread. The human who stepped off the ship was not what expected. She had imagined someone huge and muscular, covered in scars, with cold, dead eyes. Lieutenant Casey Moore was none of those things. She was average height for a human, with brown hair cut short and practical. Her eyes were green and sharp and missed nothing. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was and did not need to prove it. The welcoming ceremony was brief and formal. Stood beside her father and watched as Casey knelt before the throne and swore to protect the princess with her life. The human's voice was calm and steady. She did not seem nervous at all. Found that irritating. The first days were difficult. Casey followed everywhere, a silent shadow in human military gray. She stood outside the princess's door at night. She sat in the corner during diplomatic meetings. She walked 3 steps behind in the palace corridors. Tried to ignore her. She spoke to Casey only when absolutely necessary, using short words and formal phrases. She never made eye contact. She never asked questions. She treated the human like a piece of furniture that happened to move. But Casey did not seem offended. She simply did her job with quiet efficiency. She learned the layout of the palace. She memorized the schedules of the guards. She studied the faces of everyone who came near the princess. And she watched with those sharp green eyes that seemed to see everything. The court noticed the human, of course. They whispered behind their hands and let their skin flicker with the yellow-green light of disgust. In the palace, a primitive standing in the shadow of their princess. It was an insult. It was a humiliation. Heard the whispers and felt her skin want to shift with anger. She forced it to stay white. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her react. What she did not expect was that Casey heard the whispers too. The human understood more than she let on. She heard the insults and the jokes made at her expense, but she never responded. She never let her face show anything except calm professionalism. One night could not sleep. She stood at her window and looked out at the 3 moons hanging in the sky. She did not hear Casey approach, but suddenly the human was there, standing a respectful distance away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Casey said quietly that the moons were beautiful. She said that Earth only had 1 moon, and it was gray and covered in dust. She had never seen anything like this. Did not respond. She kept her eyes on the sky and her skin perfectly still. But something strange happened. She found herself listening to Casey's voice. It was warm and soft, nothing like the harsh sound she had expected from a human, and there was something in the way Casey looked at the moons. Wonder. Simple, honest wonder. Casey excused herself and returned to her post outside the door, stood alone at the window for a long time afterward. The weeks passed slowly, attended her duties and ignored her bodyguard. She sat through meetings with diplomats and dinners with nobles and ceremonies that seemed to have no purpose except to remind everyone how important she was. She was so tired of being important. Sometimes, late at night, her skin would flicker with faint traces of blue when she thought no one was watching. Loneliness. The color of being surrounded by people and still feeling completely alone. She did not know that Casey saw it. The human stood in the shadows and watched that blue light pulse beneath the princess's perfect white skin. She did not say anything. She did not tell anyone. But she began to understand that was not the cold, emotionless statue she pretended to be. There was something underneath all that control, something soft and sad and desperately alone. Casey had protected a lot of people in her career. Politicians and generals and wealthy merchants who thought their money made them special. She had never really cared about any of them beyond doing her job. But there was something in the way she held herself so perfectly still, as if any movement might shatter her. Something in those rare flickers of blue that she tried so hard to hide. Casey found herself wanting to know what the princess was really like underneath all that armor. She found herself wanting to see what colors her skin could show if she ever let herself feel something. It was unprofessional. It was probably dangerous. But Casey had never been very good at staying away from dangerous things. The state dinner had been going on for 3 hours and wanted nothing more than to disappear. She sat at the high table beside her father and smiled her perfect empty smile, while diplomats and nobles filled the great hall with noise and laughter. Casey stood against the wall behind her, watching everything. Had grown used to the human's presence over the past month. It was strange how quickly something could become normal. She no longer flinched when she caught a glimpse of gray military uniform in the corner of her eye. She no longer felt her skin want to shift with irritation when Casey followed her through the palace corridors. If she was being honest with herself, she had started to find the human's presence almost comforting. Casey was the only person in the palace who did not want anything from her. The human did not care about politics or power or position. She simply did her job, quietly and efficiently, and asked for nothing in return. It was refreshing. It was also deeply confusing. The dinner continued. Made polite conversation with the ambassador from the Confederacy, a large reptilian creature with scales the color of dried blood. Ambassador was known throughout the galaxy for his sharp tongue and his hatred of humans. He had opposed Earth's entry into the Galactic Council, and he made no secret of his disgust at the new alliance between humans and. He leaned close to and spoke in a voice that was just loud enough for those nearby to hear. He said it was such a shame that the princess had to be followed around by a pet. He said he understood that the humans needed to feel important, but surely there were limits. Surely the great empire could find a better use for such creatures than letting them lurk in corners like trained animals. Felt her skin want to flash with golden anger. She forced it to stay white. She opened her mouth to deliver a carefully neutral response. But before she could speak, Casey stepped forward. The human's voice was calm and pleasant. She said that she was honored to serve in the court. She said that humans believed there was no greater purpose than protecting those who could not protect themselves. She said that she understood the ambassador's concern, of course. They had a proud warrior tradition. Perhaps he was simply worried that a human soldier might make his own guards look inadequate by comparison. The words were perfectly polite. The tone was perfectly respectful, but everyone at the table understood exactly what Casey had said. Ambassador's scales darkened with fury. He looked like he wanted to respond, but there was nothing he could say without admitting that a human had just outmaneuvered him in front of the entire court. He turned away and did not speak to again for the rest of the evening. Kept her face perfectly still, but inside she was stunned. She had assumed humans were incapable of subtlety. She had assumed they only understood violence and aggression. But Casey had just delivered a more devastating response than anything could have managed, and she had done it without raising her voice or breaking any rules of diplomacy. The dinner ended eventually. Walked back to her chambers with Casey 3 steps behind her, as always. But when they reached her door, she did not immediately go inside. She turned and looked at Casey directly. It was the first time she had ever done that. She asked how Casey had known what to say. Casey's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened. She said she had been studying culture since she received this assignment. She had read the histories and the poetry and the diplomatic records. She had learned about thee and their pride and their weaknesses. Asked why. Why would a human soldier spend her free time reading poetry? Casey was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she wanted to understand. She said that she could not protect someone she did not know. She wanted to understand the princess, not just the position. Felt something shift inside her chest. Her skin flickered with a color she did not recognize, something warm and soft that she had never felt before. She forced it back to white before Casey could see. She thanked the human quietly and went inside her chambers. But she did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about green eyes and soft voices and words that had defended her honor without asking for anything in return. The days that followed were different. Found herself speaking to Casey more often. Small things at first. She mentioned that she liked the flowers in the palace garden. She asked if humans had similar plants on Earth. She commented on the weather or the food or the artwork on the walls. Casey answered every question with patience and warmth. She told about Earth, about the oceans and the mountains and the cities that reached toward the sky. She described the taste of coffee and the sound of rain and the feeling of sunshine on bare skin. Listened to every word. She had never heard anyone talk about their home with such obvious love. They spoke of their empire in terms of power and duty. They did not speak of beauty or wonder or the simple joy of being alive. One evening, asked Casey what music humans listened to. Casey smiled and said she could show her if the princess wanted. She pulled a small device from her pocket and played a song. The melody was simple, and the words were in a language did not understand. But there was something in the music that made her chest ache. She asked what the song was about. Casey said it was a love song. A song about finding someone who made you feel like you were not alone in the universe. Skin flickered with soft pink light before she could stop it. She looked away quickly, embarrassed, waiting for Casey to comment on her loss of control. But Casey said nothing. She simply turned off the music and excused herself to her post outside the door. Sat alone in her chambers and pressed her hand against her chest. Her heart was beating too fast. Her skin kept wanting to glow with that soft pink light that she had spent her entire life suppressing. She was in trouble. She knew she was in trouble. But for the first time in her life, she did not want to run away from it. The anniversary celebration filled the palace with light and music and hundreds of guests from across the galaxy. 1 year since the alliance between Earth and the Empire. 1 year since humans had become part of something larger than themselves. Stood in the great hall and watched the crowds move around her like colorful fish in a vast ocean. She wore her finest gown, layers of silver fabric that caught the light and made her look like a living star. Her skin was perfectly white, perfectly controlled as always. But inside, she was not thinking about the celebration. She was thinking about Casey. The human stood nearby in her dress uniform, a dark blue jacket with silver buttons that made her look almost elegant. Casey had complained that morning about having to wear something so impractical. She said she could not fight properly in a jacket with this many buttons. Had laughed, actually laughed, a soft sound that had surprised them both. Casey had stared at her with wide eyes, and skin had flickered pink before she could stop it. That had been happening more and more often lately. The flickering, the loss of control, should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself not caring as much as she should. The celebration continued, moved through the crowds and made polite conversation and smiled her empty smile. But whenever she had a free moment, her eyes found Casey. The human was always watching, always alert, those green eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. It should have made feel trapped. Instead, it made her feel safe. The evening was almost over when Casey's posture changed, noticed immediately. The human's shoulders went stiff. Her hand moved toward her sidearm. Her eyes locked onto something across the room. Followed her gaze and saw nothing unusual. A servant carrying drinks. A diplomat from a minor species standing near the exit. A noble adjusting his ceremonial robes. But Casey had seen something. Could tell. There was a tension in the human's body that had not been there a moment ago. Casey stepped closer to. She leaned in and spoke quietly. She said they needed to leave. She said something was wrong. She did not know what yet, but they needed to leave right now. Opened her mouth to respond. The first shot came from somewhere above them. A flash of blue plasma energy screamed through the air and struck the floor where had been standing half a second earlier. Casey had already grabbed her and pulled her aside. The human moved faster than had ever seen anyone move. The great hall erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and ran in every direction. Guards drew their weapons and searched for targets. More shots rang out from the balconies above. Casey did not hesitate. She wrapped one arm around and pulled her toward the nearest exit, her sidearm in her other hand. She fired twice without looking and heard two bodies hit the ground. They reached a corridor. Casey pushed behind her and kept moving, checking every corner, every shadow. Her face was calm. Her hands were steady. She moved like this was exactly what she had trained for her entire life. Because it was. They were almost at the secure room when the third assassin appeared. He stepped out of a doorway directly in front of them, his weapon already aimed at its chest. Casey threw herself forward. The plasma bolt struck her in the shoulder, heard the sizzle of burned flesh. She smelled something sharp and terrible. Casey stumbled but did not fall. She raised her sidearm and put 3 shots into the assassin's chest before he could fire again. Then she turned back too. Her face was pale. Blood was spreading across her uniform, but her voice was steady when she said they needed to keep moving. She got into the secure room. She sealed the door behind them. She checked every corner of the room to make sure it was safe. Then her legs gave out. Caught her before she hit the floor. The princess dropped to her knees and pulled Casey into her arms, not caring about the blood that soaked into her silver gown. Casey's eyes were unfocused. Her breathing was shallow. She tried to say something, tried to tell that she would be fine, but the words came out broken and weak. Skin erupted with color, purple terror, green anguish, blue desperation. Every emotion she had spent her entire life suppressing came flooding out at once, painting her skin in a storm of light that she could not control. She did not care. She did not care about control. She did not care about duty or dignity or what anyone would think if they saw her like this. She only cared about Casey. She pressed her hand against Casey's wound and called for help. She screamed for help, her voice cracking with emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. Her skin blazed with that warm golden color she still did not have a name for. The medical team arrived. They tried to take Casey from her arms, would not let go. She held Casey's hand and refused to move, her skin still cycling through colors like a broken signal. They worked on Casey right there on the floor. They sealed the wound and stopped the bleeding and pumped her full of medicines that did not understand. through all of it, did not let go of her hand. When they finally stabilized her, Casey opened her eyes. She looked up at and saw the colors dancing across the princess's skin. She smiled weakly and said that skin was beautiful. Felt tears streaming down her face. She had not even known that could cry. She squeezed Casey's hand and did not say anything at all. But she did not let go, not even for a moment. Casey woke to soft light and the sound of someone breathing nearby. Her shoulder burned with a dull, distant pain that told her she was on strong medication. Her mouth was dry. Her body felt heavy and strange. She turned her head slowly and found sitting in a chair beside her bed. The princess looked terrible. Her silver gown was stained with dried blood. Her hair hung loose and tangled around her face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her skin was calm, a soft, steady white that told Casey nothing about what she was feeling. Casey tried to speak. Her voice came out as a croak. She asked how long she had been unconscious. Leaned forward. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. She said Casey had been asleep for 3 days. She said the doctors had fixed her shoulder and given her new tissue and told her she would make a full recovery. Casey nodded slowly. That was good. That was very good. Then she asked a different question. She asked how long had been sitting in that chair. Looked away. Her skin flickered with pale pink before she could stop it. She said she had not left. She said she had wanted to be there when Casey woke up. Casey stared at her. 3 days. The princess of the empire had sat beside a human soldier's bed for 3 days. She did not know what to say. The days that followed were strange and quiet. Casey was confined to the medical wing while her shoulder healed, visited every day, sometimes for hours at a time. They talked about small things at first. The weather outside, the food the doctors kept bringing, the annoying way the medical machines beeped every few minutes. But slowly, the conversations grew deeper. Told Casey about her childhood. She had grown up in the palace, surrounded by servants and tutors and guards who watched her every move. She had been taught from birth that emotions were dangerous, that any flicker of color on her skin was a failure of control. She had spent years learning to feel nothing, to want nothing, to be nothing except the perfect princess her people needed her to be. She said she had been so lonely, so terribly, desperately lonely. But she had never been able to tell anyone because admitting to loneliness would mean admitting that she felt something. Casey listened without interrupting. When finished, she reached out and took the princess's hand. She told about Earth. She told her about growing up in a small town in a place called Ohio. She told her about her parents, who had worked hard their entire lives and still found time to tell her they loved her every single day. She told her about joining the military because she wanted to protect people, because she wanted her life to mean something. She told that she had protected a lot of important people in her career, politicians and generals and ambassadors, but she had never cared about any of them. Not really. They were just jobs. They were just missions. Was different. Casey said she did not know when it had happened. Maybe it was that first night, when she had seen standing at the window with blue loneliness flickering beneath her skin. Maybe it was that dinner, when the ambassador had insulted her, and Casey had felt a fierce protective anger rise in her chest. Maybe it was all the quiet moments in between, when had slowly begun to let her walls come down. She said that protecting had stopped being a job somewhere along the way. It had become the thing that mattered most to her in the entire universe. Skin glowed with soft pink light. She did not try to hide it. She did not pull her hand away. She sat there with tears in her eyes and let Casey see exactly how she felt. She said she had never had anyone fight for her before. Not like that. She had guards and servants and courtiers who served her because it was their duty. But Casey had nearly died for her. Casey had taken a plasma bolt that was meant to end her life. No one had ever done anything like that for her. No one had ever made her feel like she was worth dying for. Casey squeezed her hand gently. She said was worth everything. She said was the bravest person she had ever met. Laughed softly, a broken sound that was half sob. She said she was not brave. She said she had spent her entire life hiding from her own feelings because she was too scared to face them. Casey shook her head. She said that was not true. She said it took incredible courage to feel nothing year after year because that was what everyone expected. But it took even more courage to start feeling again, to let someone in, to risk being hurt. She said was doing that right now, and that made her the bravest person Casey had ever known. Skin blazed with that warm golden color. She still did not have a name for it, but looking at Casey, feeling Casey's hand warm in hers, she thought she was starting to understand what it meant. The investigation into the assassination attempt continued. The palace guards traced the assassins back to a faction within the court, nobles who opposed the alliance with Earth. They believed humans were dangerous, that the princess was being corrupted by her proximity to read the reports with cold fury building in her chest. Her own people had tried to kill her because she had dared to care about a human. Her own people had decided that her life was worth less than their prejudice. She found she did not care about their opinions anymore. She had spent her entire life caring what people thought. She had shaped herself into the perfect princess because that was what the court demanded. But the court had just tried to murder her. Casey was the one who had saved her life. Casey was the one who had taken a plasma bolt meant for her heart. Casey was the one who had been there every single moment since. Made a decision. She was done hiding. She was done pretending. She was done being the cold, perfect, emotionless princess that everyone expected. She was going to fight for what she wanted. And what she wanted was standing right beside her, with green eyes and a warm smile and a heart brave enough to love a lonely alien princess. The throne room was silent. Emperor sat on his ancient chair of polished stone and looked out at the assembled court. Hundreds of nobles filled the great hall, their skin carefully controlled to perfect white, but could feel the tension in the air. She could sense the fear and the anger and the disgust that they were all trying so hard to hide. The conspirators had been arrested. The nobles who had planned the assassination were now locked in cells beneath the palace, waiting for judgment. But their allies remained free, and they had not been quiet. They demanded that Casey be sent back to Earth. They claimed that the human had corrupted the princess, had influenced her with emotional manipulation and tricks. They said that Casey's presence in the court was inappropriate, dangerous, a threat to stability. They wanted her gone. Emperor listened to their arguments with his face carved from stone. He was a practical man, a political man. He understood the value of alliances and the danger of internal conflict. The faction demanding Casey's removal was powerful. If he ignored them, they could cause serious problems for his reign. Stood at the base of the throne and watched her father consider. She saw the calculation in his eyes. She saw him weighing the cost of keeping Casey against the cost of sending her away. She stepped forward before he could speak. The court fell silent. Every eye turned to the princess, felt their gazes on her skin like physical pressure. Her instinct was to control herself, to stay white and calm and perfect. She let the colors come instead. Her skin shifted to deep blue as she spoke of the loneliness she had felt her entire life. She told them about growing up surrounded by people who feared her emotions, who taught her that feeling anything was weakness. She told them about the endless performances, the empty smiles, the years of pretending to be something she was not. Her skin changed to purple as she spoke of the fear that had gripped her during the assassination attempt. She described the chaos of the Great Hall, the screams and the plasma fire, and the certainty that she was about to die. She told them how Casey had thrown herself in front of the shot without hesitation, how the human had taken a wound meant to kill a princess. Her skin blazed golden as she spoke of what Casey had taught her. She said that humans were not the monsters the court believed. They were not primitive or dangerous or emotionally unstable. They felt everything deeply, and they were not ashamed of it. They loved fiercely and protected those they cared about with everything they had. She said that Casey had shown her a different way to live, not hiding from emotions but embracing them, not fearing feelings but finding strength in them. She said that for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to truly care about someone. She turned to face her father directly. Her skin was a storm of colors now, every emotion she had ever suppressed coming out at once. She did not try to control any of it. She declared that Casey would remain at her side, not as a servant or a guard or a political symbol, as her advisor, as her protector, as her friend. She said that anyone who challenged this decision was challenging her directly. The court erupted in whispers. Nobles turned to each other with shock painted across their faces. Some of their skins flickered with yellow disgust. Others showed pale pink surprise. A few, just a few, glowed with soft white approval. Emperor raised his hand for silence. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. He had not seen her show emotion in public since she was a small child. He had spent years teaching her to be still, to be cold, to be the perfect heir to his throne. Now she stood before him blazing with every color of the rainbow, openly defying the most powerful nobles in his court. She had never looked more like a leader. He spoke slowly. He said that the alliance with Earth was important to the Empire. He said that humans had proven themselves valuable partners. He said that Lieutenant Casey Moore had demonstrated exceptional bravery and loyalty in protecting his daughter. He said that Casey would remain in her position. The matter was closed. The court did not erupt in protest. They did not dare. The emperor had spoken, and his word was law, but could see the anger in some of their faces, the determination to continue fighting this battle another day. She did not care, she had won. That was all that mattered. Later, when the court had emptied and the political noise had faded, found Casey on the palace balcony. The human was looking out at the 3 moons rising over the city, her face peaceful and calm. Walked to stand beside her. She did not speak for a long moment. She just stood there, letting herself feel the cool night air and the warmth of Casey's presence. Finally, she thanked Casey. She thanked her for saving her life. She thanked her for showing her how to feel again. She thanked her for being there when no one else was. Casey turned to look at her. Those green eyes were soft and warm in the moonlight. She said she was just doing her job. Laughed. It was a real laugh this time, bright and genuine and completely uncontrolled. She said that was not true and they both knew it. Casey smiled. She admitted that maybe it had become a little more than a job. Skin glowed with that warm golden color. She finally understood what it meant. It was the color of love, the color of finding someone who made you feel like you were not alone in the universe. She reached out and took Casey's hand. The human's fingers were warm against her cool skin. She did not pull away. They stood together on the balcony, the princess and her warrior, looking out at the moons. Behind them, the palace hummed with political intrigue and ancient traditions. Ahead of them lay challenges and conflicts, and a galaxy that did not understand what they had found in each other. But none of that mattered, not tonight. Tonight, for the first time in her life, let herself feel everything without shame. And beside her stood the only human in the universe who could have taught her how. The moons rose higher in the violet sky. Somewhere in the distance, music was playing, and the shy alien princess who had never allowed herself to feel anything held hands with her warrior and smiled. It was, she thought, the most beautiful night of her life.